News, interviews, education. We are TNM News.
In 2014, Las Vegas-based DigiPath Labs brought in the highly experienced Dr. Cindy Orser to be the company's chief science officer. Well, since then, this tenured biochemistry professor from the University of Idaho has built a state-of-the-art facility that could potentially set the precedent for how marijuana testing is done, not just today, but way into the future as well. So, Dr. Orser, welcome to the National Marijuana News.
Thank you, Todd.
So give us some of your background. I know that you've been dealing with plants for a very long time, right? You have your PhD and you have a very diverse background. So how did that diverse background in testing standards, lead you to marijuana?
I've had a pretty extensive background in diagnostics across a vast field from, toxicology, measuring human mutation rates, developing assays for prions in human blood supply, looking at dehalogenation reactions, determining how to preserve platelets. I mean, I've had vast experience, which has been great, and I've loved every minute of it. I've been a scientist, I think, since I was 7 years old.
Oh, nice.
But the way I ended up in the marijuana industry is I had a diagnostic testing lab that was largely funded by Homeland Security, where we were developing rapid diagnostics for biothreat agents. And
what does that mean?
Yeah, so what does that mean? So biothreat agents is any kind of biological bacteria, virus, toxin that could be weaponized and used against a population, whether, like sarin gas in Syria. I mean, that's a bioweapon.
Right.
We were developing assays for biological toxins, so ricin and botulinum toxin. And this was during the sequestration back in 2009, when a lot of the federal funding dollars were dramatically reduced. Anyway, I got very disillusioned, couldn't raise any money, and sort of ventured into more what I call mercenary science, where I have a consulting company and I was doing various consulting jobs. I was the director of research for the state of Montana, the commissioner of higher education for 6 months, which was a fascinating experience, tons of driving, however.
Right.
And during that time, I was contacted by a headhunter for DigiPath. And DigiPath was looking for a scientist who was well-versed in diagnostics, and they approached me and asked if I would be interested to help them design, build out, staff, document a diagnostic testing lab for medical marijuana. And I thought that sounds like a really interesting, task, and it has been daunting. And at the very beginning, I thought, it's like eating an elephant one bite at a time. But it's worked out.
And how do you think your experience with Homeland Security and the CDC, has helped you to develop the protocols that you're now going to use for marijuana testing?
Yeah, well, it's been a perfect prelude to this because the amount of attention to detail, developing the precise assays, methodologies, and the documentation. Really, that's something that I don't think a lot of people appreciate in the diagnostic testing world, that the amount of documentation that's required, the development of the standard operating procedures, the protocols, the quality management system. I mean, that is universal. It doesn't matter if you're testing for biothreat agents, you're testing for prions in the human blood supply, or you're testing for THC and heavy metals in marijuana. All of those principles transfer over. And so, it's been pretty seamless, and it's actually been really rewarding because this is a more you can feel that you're making progress, right? It's not as if you have to bring big international organizations together in the case of, testing for prions in the blood supply or something. So, we've been so lucky in Las Vegas finding highly qualified people to staff the lab, and just operational staff. Everything has worked out really well.
Awesome. Let's talk a little bit about DigiPath Labs.
Okay.
And I know it was a huge endeavor, like you were mentioning before. And I know that it's a state-of-the-art facility. Talk about how you were able to achieve what you did, and what's going on over there.
Yeah, well, I tell you, we've come a long way from last summer, where we were looking at a big empty warehouse. And if you walk into our lab today, it's a state-of-the-art facility. It's extremely well laid out, highest security system in place. We made the decision to go with Agilent's analytical equipment, which is probably the most expensive on the market, has the best reputation, and has the most highest sensitivity. So we really have a beautiful analytical lab. For our microbial screening, we've adopted the medicinal genomics system for qPCR for rapid genomic detection, and that's working out really well. We also screen for mycotoxins, so we're using Romer Labs. They have rapid kits that have cutoff at the level required for the state for aflatoxins and ochratoxin A.
What are the tests that you have to do?
There are 8 tests. So, and in the state of Nevada, we go to the grower's facility and we actually select the samples. So at the moment, it's 12 grams for every 5 pounds of product. We bring it back to the lab. We do a visual inspection under a microscope. So we're actually looking to see if there are any dead bugs in there, or if what level of development the trichomes are. We capture an image, and that's the first step in what we call creating our certificate of analysis. So this is what the customer will receive from us.
The final results.
Yeah. So the sample is assigned its own number, and that's barcoded. So every sample that comes in gets barcoded. We do the visual analysis. Then we homogenize the sample. So this is a very, very critical and an important point for any diagnostic testing when you have a varied matrix. I mean, you've seen a big cannabis bud. It's variable, right? There's some stem in the middle and trichomes and a lot of resin. So you want to get a very good homogenization of the sample. So we do that, and then we take sub-samples from that for each of the subsequent analytical tests.
Well, just even prepping it seems like a huge ordeal.
Well, it's just, you just have to be precise.
Right.
And then we do residual moisture analysis.
Right.
So we want to know what % of the weight of that material is due to water. Then we do a scan for cannabinoids. We analyze for 9 different cannabinoids, and so we identify their presence, and we also quantitate them. And then we analyze for 21 terpenes by GC mass spec. We also do a separate extraction looking for residual pesticides. Currently, we're looking at 17 synthetic pesticides by LC triple quad mass spec. And again, we look for the presence of them, and we also quantitate them if we see them. And the way that we do this is by using standards, of course, and we use standards for the cannabinoids and terpenes as well.
Right.
And then we analyze for heavy metals, and it's the big 4. And then we go on to
What are the big 4, just in case someone doesn't know that?
Lead, mercury, arsenic.
And cadmium.
Cadmium.
Right.
And then the microbial, which is like its own little world, we look for the presence of any pathogenic E. coli or salmonella. there's tolerance for none. So
Right.
if we, and this is per 1 gram, so we analyze 1 gram. If we get any at all, the product fails. And then we also analyze for total aerobic bacteria, fungi and mold, and there are cutoff levels. Like for the fungi and mold, there can't be above 10,000 microorganisms per gram. We also have to analyze for bile-tolerant gram-negative bacteria. And
Oh, 'cause, yeah. I bet there's a lot of that floating around right here. Right.
so the micro component is quite extensive and justifiably so. And then we do the mycotoxins, which we use these immunochemistry assays that are sold by Romer Labs, which are terrific products.
Right. This sounds like an incredible process. How long does all of that take?
Yeah, well, our commitment to our clients is that we turn our results around in 48 hours. So it really depends on how many samples we have coming in the door on any one particular day to get in the queue to go through all these various stages. Of course, our analytical instruments all have auto-samplers, which means that we can prep 100 samples. We can put them in the machine. We can all go home. And when we come back in the morning, the machine has cranked out the results.
Wow.
And the other great feature of the way we set up DigiPath Labs is we have what's called a laboratory information management system. Mm-hmm. So all the instruments are connected to our server. As the results come in for a certain barcoded sample, that data automatically populates the certificate of analysis. So it's just a matter then of reviewing the data. Our lab manager, any AFIA, then signs off on the data. Our customers have a customer portal, so it's a seamless access. They can just log in and they can see if their samples are done or which ones are done, and they can access and download the results.
Wow. It sounds incredibly high tech, and just very impressive. It seems like now, does every lab do everything that you just said?
Well, if you're operating in the state of Nevada, you're required to perform all these tests. Mm-hmm. Now, other labs might have slightly different instrumentation. Not everyone is equipped with the triple quad because that's actually an extremely high-end instrument. It costs $250,000.
Wow.
Yeah.
For one machine?
Yeah, one machine.
Wow.
And as you might expect, it also takes an extremely well-qualified technical individual to run the instrument.
Sure.
Because you don't want it to fail and break down.
Yeah. It's like driving a Ferrari.
Yeah,
right?
It is. It is our Ferrari or our Lamborghini.
Right. So it seems like you built something pretty special there in Nevada. And is the plan to just stay in Nevada and just be the best, or is
no?
How do you see it working out over the next few years?
Yeah, well, we DigiPath, we would like to be the LabCorp or the Quest diagnostic for the marijuana industry. So our ambitions are big, and we would like to have a presence in every state that has legalized medical marijuana.
Now, you said you had a highly skilled crew over there. So talk about where
our
you
staff,
found them and who they are, and
Yeah, so Inia Afia, who's from Nigeria, a very bright analytical chemist. We found him locally, and he is our analytical lab manager. He's extremely well-versed on all the instrumentation. Great guy, family man. So he was already here in Nevada. Mm-hmm. And then we have Glenn Marquise, who is an analytical chemist, and we found him in the Bay Area. He relocated. Oh, wow. And his primary responsibility is running our Ferrari, the triple quad, and developing all the methodologies for the pesticides, because this is another thing that we haven't even talked about, and that I doubt hardly anyone realizes, is that when you develop methodologies for marijuana, that you have to spike in everything that you want to measure into the plant material. So we call that the matrix, because you have to develop your extractions, your profile that you run on the instruments in that background. So that takes a lot of time and effort because you need to have the plant material with nothing spiked in, so 0, low, high, and then a gradient, and then you have to run all those so you know how much pesticide you spiked in, so you have to see what is my extraction proficiency. And, are the other labs doing this? I hope they are, because there are guidelines. You have to extract the chemical from 70 to 120%. This is by guidelines from the chemical standards. Right. So there's just a lot of work. So anyway, Glenn is responsible for that. And then we have a young woman, Shannon Tholson, who is a student here at UNLV in the Department of Chemistry. She has 1 year left, and she's just been fantastic. I mean, she came in. She had been working at Lowe's. She was so excited to get a job in her field, and she has really risen to the challenge. She, in less than 6 months, she's now able to run all of our analytical instruments, everything except micro. So we're just really thrilled.
Now, over the past year in Colorado, you said you're from Colorado, right? There's been a bunch of issues with edible products.
Right.
Unsanitary equipment. There's been mislabeling, mistested stuff.
Yes.
So what's your take on, the regulations in Colorado, and how do you think it really should work out? Because it's a little different here in Nevada, right?
Right. Well, so, Colorado, it's so interesting that, of course, they have medical marijuana and recreational marijuana, that there's only mandatory testing on recreational marijuana. And it was just like, I'm not sure exactly what they were thinking. I mean, they're rectifying that now, and they are really beefing up their testing requirements. But and they're struggling now with the fact that they didn't have a pesticide screening policy in place, and that's impacting a lot of the high-volume producers there.
Seems like it was a rush to open.
Yeah,
and they opened maybe a little too soon.
Right. Where in Nevada now, they're taking the opposite approach, which is extremely methodically. And I applaud the Division of Public Health and Behavior here in Nevada, because it's an incredible task to take on. It's like standing up an entire industry from a simple law that was passed, and then reducing that into the regulations and drilling down into all of the particular quality assurance tests that go on here. And Colorado, Nevada, they both, though, have overlooked the necessity of screening edibles for residual solvents and pesticides. So the pesticides tend to concentrate when you make the extracts from the flower. And even though in Nevada we screen for pesticides in the flower, there's no requirement to screen for pesticides in either the oils or the edibles. And I think that should be required.
Right.
Because even if a flower can pass the residuals, if that pesticide is concentrated by tenfold, it often won't pass.
Interesting.
Yeah. So that is one difference.
And there's a big pesticide issue in Colorado recently. And how do you think that's all going to shake out?
Well, so I've attended some of those meetings. Just interested in how Colorado is dealing with it, and it's really the city of Denver. So the city of Denver was the first one to get pulled into coming up with some way to deal with the pesticide use in these very large grows. And it was a public health concern, right? Because, pesticide residues, it's all about patient safety, and it is a problem. And, so at the federal level, it's the EPA sets the tolerance guidelines for pesticides, and on the label, it'll say which pesticides can be used on which crops, if it can be used indoors, if it can, how close to harvest. But we have this weird situation with marijuana, right? It's a Schedule I drug. It's not a commodity.
Right.
There are no pesticides registered. So there's really nothing to be used. So everybody's trying to come up with some creative interpretation that both allows the industry to move forward and to protect public safety.
Right.
And Colorado seems to just have sort of a hit and miss approach. They know the list of pesticides that the growers like to use, so then it falls to, well, what's an acceptable tolerance? And what most states end up doing is they adopt the most stringent levels of residues. And so the most stringent levels for any food commodity is milk and meat.
Right.
So that's through a secondary exposure. So as you might expect, it's extremely low levels. I mean, we're talking 0.1 ppm,
Right.
part per million. And whereas now we have this unique situation in Nevada that just recently developed because the legislature required the Division of Public Health to actually publish a list of pesticides.
Right. So so the law said you must publish a list. So they had to come up with a safe list, an approved list. What kind of list did they come up with?
Well, so they came up with what's called Crop Group 19. So this is a listing. It's herbs and hops and it's thought to be similar to marijuana, but as you know, there's nothing similar to marijuana.
Tomatoes are kind of close.
Well, except tomato makes a big juicy
Big
fruit.
That's right. Right.
And you don't smoke tomatoes.
That is true. Although maybe somewhere, somebody is smoking
is
tomatoes.
trying to do that. So it's a daunting task to pigeonhole it into some existing framework within the EPA. But it's all make-believe because we're just applying federal law to a crop that's not recognized as a crop.
Right. What's the answer?
Yeah, so what is the answer? Well, the answer is that we need to have a national discussion. We have to, when I say we, I mean it's the people and their representatives.
Right.
Get your head out of the sand. When more than half of the country has endorsed the use of this crop for its medicinal benefits, I mean, let's take it on instead of ignoring it. So it should not be a Schedule I drug because it obviously has medicinal benefit. We can reference 100 scientific publications showing that it has medicinal benefit. So let's get the drug rescheduled. Let's have a conversation with the EPA, the Department of Agriculture, and the FDA, and let's determine how should this be regulated. We should be doing pesticide trials. I would think that the manufacturers of a lot of these pesticides that are being used, it would be in their best interest to stand up, embrace this new industry, fund the pesticide trials. Let's determine what is a safe level for residues. And is it equivalent to nutmeg and basil or hops? I mean, let's do the experiment and empirically determine those levels.
Yeah, I think the pesticide companies, they don't market specifically to the marijuana grower, right?
No.
The marijuana grower has to go test and try right.
Right. But, and as we've spoken before, I mean, any pesticide residue, just because the EPA says that it's okay if there's 10 parts per million of myclobutanol on your grapes, who knows? Because it's a cumulative effect.
Right.
And,
No, I've read that there's 51 traces of pesticides on the average head of lettuce.
Yeah, I believe
the average
it.
head of lettuce that we eat every single day.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And how do you see the landscape going in the next 5 years? Do you think it's going to be standardized the same in every state? Is there still going to be this? Well, you got to do this here, you got to do this there.
Yeah.
I mean, it seems like Nevada. All the gambling laws that happen around the country are based on what happened in Nevada.
Yeah.
And what I've been reading is that Nevada is really going to be the bellwether state for the rest of the country. Do you think that's going to pan out?
I think it is because since Nevada has adopted the most rigorous testing requirements of any state, it's pretty hard for any subsequent state that's coming online with medical marijuana to not look at Nevada and say, we're going to do it that way. Because, I mean, Nevada has put a lot of time and effort into coming up with these testing guidelines, and they really have put patient safety first. So I think it's a great model, and it's very fortuitous that DigiPath started out in Nevada because it's going to be a lot easier to roll out in the other states. And whatever other states we go into, I mean, we're going to set a very high bar for the testing of medical marijuana.
Right. And do you think it's going to take like this incredibly impressive, highly technologically advanced, highly educated folks to really run these labs, and that's how you see the future going?
Yeah, no, it is. I mean, there's no way around that because you have to have analytical chemists running these extremely sophisticated instruments. I mean, some of the the intake with the samples and barcoding, visual inspections, obviously you don't need somebody with a highly technical degree. But, we've found an incredible response here in Nevada. People send us their resumes all the time. We have a file. I mean, so there's a lot of interest in young science grads to get into this field. And I think it's smart because it's only going to grow. And it's not just the testing. We can bring people in and train them for the testing, but there's so many offshoots to this industry, whether it's improving assays, simplifying assays, coming up with new ways of analyzing for these compounds.
Right. And you've been studying marijuana for a while, so how do you see it helping us? As a people, as a society, as Americans, as Earth members.
Yeah, well, it's really it's a revolution, and that's why I think at the national level it's going to be embraced. I mean, just look at the impact it's had in the state of Colorado, just the tax revenue alone, and they don't even talk so much about how it's changed employment.
Right.
And it's not just the people who are working in the grows and harvesting the plants and taking care of them. I mean, it's all of the auxiliary companies.
That's right.
It's the electricians and plumbers and contractors. It's just been a boom. There is not a vacant warehouse in Denver right now, and rents are skyrocketing. I mean, it's just set the economy on fire.
Like a gold rush.
And it's, and Colorado was smart enough to set aside the first, I think it's $40 million of tax revenue. It all goes to capital improvements in the public schools.
Oh, that's so great.
Yeah. So, it's a win-win. So that's just, on the economic side. But the real story is the medicinal benefit of this plant. And as the industry becomes more sophisticated, we'll be looking at more defined formulations of the plant. And I think that's the route the medical marijuana needs to go. We need to move away from advising people to actually smoke the flower. I mean, which is like, really? You have one ailment, so you're going to smoke something. And
so you're saying that it shouldn't be smoked. How should it be ingested?
Well, so that's what I'm saying is that I think for the medical community, the people who are legitimate patients who have chronic disease, it's much better to have defined formulations where they take it orally or sublingually, where they're not smoking it. Because
what's a defined formulation? So you're not going to the dispensary and getting an AK-47.
Right.
You're going to a doctor and getting XYZ.
Right. So you're getting a mixture of THC to say CBD, and we're just starting to understand the synergistic benefits of the terpenes. So when I say defined, it's getting down to what is contributing the medicinal effect. So it's the actual cannabinoids in combination with the terpenes. And there are probably even a lot of other secondary metabolites in this plant that haven't even been identified yet.
Right.
And that's why we really need to open the floodgates for research and gets us back to that Schedule 1, which makes everything extremely difficult.
Right. We were talking earlier, and you said there's over 100 studies that the FDA is currently doing with marijuana.
Well, yeah, there's 188 clinical trials going on right now in the United States with various extracts or components of marijuana.
And where do they get this marijuana from? How do they transport it? How do they get it to?
Right.
Well,
so it depends, who's doing the clinical trial, and if it's academically led group of clinicians that are doing it, I think it's most likely coming from the one source that the federal government has made available, which is from the University of Mississippi, where I think they've been growing a very small acreage. I think it's going to be expanding. I think it has expanded. I don't know anything about the strains they grow, but I've heard researchers complaining that it's nowhere equivalent to what is being grown and sold in legal states.
Well, you would think they would want to grow the best and
well, you would think they would.
Right?
You would think they would. And then, there's public companies like GW Pharma out of the UK that has several clinical trials going on in the U.S.
Right.
But, of course, they grow their own strains and do their extractions. But what my understanding is it's not that sophisticated of a formulation. It's just this extract 1 and 2, and they combine them.
Right.
And they're looking at, of course, MS in the U.S. That formulation is already approved in 9 countries.
Oh, wow.
So, the U.S. is far behind,
always.
For whatever
Right.
reason. It's just our
politics,
pig-headedness. But they're also looking at pain management for cancer patients and a lot of other chronic disease
so
states.
is this a wonder drug?
After aspirin, yeah, it is really a wonder drug. I mean, the applications for medical conditions it's just vast, and why turn our back to this? And it's going to transform the pharmaceutical world, I believe. I know pharmaceutical companies that are silently have been applying for their DEA Schedule 1 license because they want to be ready to get in on the action.
Sure. Yeah, they want to buy, though, so they're waiting for others to build.
Right. Well, yeah, so because, they lack for the ideas at the beginning, and you have to have some know-how to work with this plant. It's not easy. The extract is very goopy, sticky, viscous.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So you said that you have had some pretty high-level jobs, and sometimes the government was a contractor, right, of yours. What do you think it's going to take for this government to really make some kind of federal decisions based on your knowledge, based on what's out there, based on what's going on, and really based on what's happening economically and medically?
Yeah. Well, unfortunately, I think if you want to make progress at the national level, you have to play by their rules, which means you have to lobby. And so I would hope, and of course, a lot of the people who have been primary in getting the medical marijuana industry off the ground tend to be very independent people.
Right.
But we need to have some community building, and I think it's happening slowly. There's lots and lots of cannabis organizations, but they need to come together. They need to form a very strong lobby because there are very strong lobbies against marijuana. I think the police,
law enforcement is
the private companies that run prisons,
that's right.
The liquor boards. Probably even pharma. There's a lot of people standing in the way. So we have to play by their rules, which means we need to be a big voice in D.C. and, walking the halls of Congress. That's what it's going to take, I think. Yeah.
Interesting. And how do you think testing and safety plays a part
Okay,
in all of that.
well,
and why isn't there any standards for testing? Why aren't there any rules that say you got to do this, 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 and this, and then let's get on with it?
Right. Well, I think it's it's that circular argument thing that it's not recognized as a legal commodity.
Right.
And so all the people who would normally be jumping on the bandwagon to develop the standards around a new industry to give it credibility aren't there because of that bias.
Right.
I think that barrier is coming down significantly because now there is an accreditation company that has developed an accreditation program for medical marijuana testing labs. In fact, DigiPath Labs is just starting that process,
great.
And it's to gain what's called ISO 17025 for a diagnostic testing lab. So I think as more labs embrace this more sophistication of oversight, it's going to legitimize the industry, and there'll be more comparability across products. But everybody has to join in, right? Everybody has to take this seriously, and not just as a mom and pop testing operation.
Sure. Well, it doesn't sound like that's what you have over there at DigiPath Labs, for sure. And what do you see happening in Nevada? Give us a 3-month, a 6-month, or 1 year.
Yeah, well, so we are going around. We've been meeting with all the growers in the area. We had an open house. We invited anyone and everyone who wanted to come and see what a diagnostic testing lab looked like. A lot of the local news networks have been through.
Great.
We've had a good response.
Sure. And what do you think is going to happen in Vegas? Do you think it's really going to be a marijuana mecca or a Vegsterdam?
It's really looking like that. Because Vegas is just a unique place, and they included some provisions on their legislation that almost assures that happening. One, of course, the fact that they accept medical marijuana cards from other states, and no questions asked. So right there, you can't gauge what the number of customers will be based on what the registration levels are within the state. So I think
42 million people come to Vegas every year.
Yeah. So can you guess what percentage of those might be interested in trying a little marijuana? And I think
41 million.
And I think if you look at the map of where the dispensaries are going to be, they're very highly densely located around the Strip. So I think we're going to see some really interesting revenue out of this.
Yeah, I think so too.
Yeah.
And lastly, 2016 is going to be a big election for marijuana. What do you think is going to happen here in Nevada? What do you think is going to happen in California? Florida, it's going to be on the ballot again, and another half a dozen states or so.
Yeah.
What do you think is going to happen?
I think the numbers of states approving medical marijuana is just going to keep going up. Even states that you wouldn't have considered would even be, discussing it.
Right.
I think the recreational will pass in Nevada, hands down. There's a little bit of uncertainty about how the recreational will be managed in comparison to the medical. It seems like the liquor board wants to get involved on some of that revenue for distribution.
Why wouldn't they? Right?
Yeah, why wouldn't they? We just have to ensure that the same testing standards get assigned to recreational as have medical. I mean, that's the most important thing because, again, this is about patient safety, right? We don't want somebody from Tupelo, Mississippi coming to the Strip and buying a big edible and eating the whole thing and, jumping out their hotel window.
No, we don't want that.
Yeah, so we need to have the same quality assurance standards for recreational.
Right. Well, that's Cindy Orser, should I say Dr. Cindy Orser. She is a PhD of plant pathology and genetics and she is also the Chief Science Officer at DigiPath Labs. You want to learn more about what DigiPath Labs is doing? Simple. Go to their website. It's www.digipathlabs.com. That's DIGIPATH labs.com. Cindy, thanks for joining us here on the National Marijuana News. Let's stay in touch and let's follow DigiPath's success.
All right, great. Thanks, Todd.